Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome back to Chapter 22, Respiration. We're talking about how animals that live in water breathe. We just got done talking about gills. Oxygenated water comes in the fish's mouth, goes over the gill. Deoxygenated blood comes into the gill. It strips oxygen out of the water, and then deoxygenated water comes out the backside of the gills. And this now good oxygenated blood gets carried to the rest of the animal's body so that they can have oxygen, so they can, perform cellular respiration. A couple things about water. Water only holds 3% as much oxygen as air does. This is a very important principle. 3% as much water. So what we're saying is there's more than 30 times more oxygen in air than there is in water. And this means a number of things. One of the most important things is that there is no warm-blooded animal that breathes water. The reason is there is simply not enough oxygen in water. You could not strip oxygen out of water fast enough. You could not pass enough water over your gas exchange devices fast enough to strip enough oxygen fast enough to support a warm-blooded and endothermic organism. There are zero warm-blooded organisms that can breathe water. The only things that can breathe water are ectotherms. And the reason why is, I think we've talked about this before, but I'll mention it again. How much more food does a warm-blooded animal eat compared to a similar size cold-blooded? Does an endothermic animal eat compared to a similar size ectothermic animal? Imagine that I have a lizard and a mouse side by side that weigh the same, and we're going to put them through the same physical exercises, make them walk a certain distance or run a maze, something like that. What's the difference between the lizard and the mouse? And the difference is the mouse is endothermic, warm-blooded, and the lizard is ectothermic, cold-blooded. Which of them is going to eat more food, the mouse or the lizard? And the answer is the mouse is going to eat more. Here's a real question. How much more? How much more food do you think the mouse is going to eat compared to the lizard? The mouse is going to eat 10 times as much food to do the same activity as a lizard does. How expensive is this endothermy? How expensive is it to be warm-blooded? And the answer is really it's expensive. It takes 10 times as much energy to keep an endotherm alive compared to an ectotherm. If it takes 10 times as much energy to keep us alive, that means it has to cost 10 times as much oxygen to keep us alive. That's why zero warm-blooded organisms breathe water. Just not enough. Cold water will hold more oxygen than warm water does, which is why oftentimes in the heat of the summer you get what we call fish kills. These fish kills happen because there's just not enough oxygen in the water to even support a fish, which has, a tenth of the oxygen requirements of a mammal or bird. And fresh water holds more oxygen than salt water does. So just some principles to remember. So cold, fresh water will have a lot more oxygen in it than warm salt water. And neither of them have anywhere even close to as much oxygen in it as air does. Air has 30 times as much oxygen in it than any water does. So in the previous video, we said that gills are for use in water. And we said gills don't work outside of water. So here's this thing that spiders have. Remember that spiders are arachnids. They're kind of a special group of arthropods that have gills that work in air. Yeah, I know, but sorry. They're highly specialized gills. These very, very highly specialized gills are called book lungs. And the reason why they're called book lungs is that these gills, they're located right here, if you look at this picture. So we're looking at a spider from the side. So here's the head and the body of the spider, and so here's its abdomen, its butt. Right here, at the bottom, this is where that book lung is. On this shed tarantula skin over here, these two pockets are where these book lungs are located. So the way book lungs work is instead of being highly vascularized fingers, they're highly vascularized plates, like the pages of a book. And so the way the spider breathes is that these plates will just kind of open and close like a bellows, pumping air into the spaces between the plates. The book lung. That's why it's called a book lung, because it looks like the pages of a book. It is similar to a gill. It's a gill that works in air. And pretty much only spiders have these book lungs. No other arthropods, no other organism I'm aware of has book lungs. They're special structures. What the rest of the arthropods do, if they don't use a gill, and there are some arthropods that use gills, crabs, there are lots of 100% aquatic crabs that will use a gill. But if we're talking about terrestrial arthropods, most terrestrial arthropods, with the exception of spiders and their relatives, will use what's called tracheal respiration. Now, your trachea, you've heard that word before, your trachea, right? What's your trachea? Take your fingers, put them under, right here, on your throat, kind of move up and down gently. You feel those ridges? Feel those hard parts in there? Those ridges that you feel in there are your trachea. You would call it your windpipe. When the water goes down the wrong tube and you cough your head off and embarrassed because you don't know how to drink, when you do that, it's because water has gone down into your trachea rather than your esophagus. So your trachea is a rigid pipe that carries air from your nose and mouth to your lungs. And we'll get to that and talk about it in a little bit. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is windpipes. Insects use what we call tracheal respiration. They don't have lungs or gills. What they have is windpipes that go throughout the entire animal's body. I've got a picture coming up in just a second. It's kind of neat looking, actually. This right here is a very close-up picture of the trachea, these windpipes, within a bee, a honeybee. I want you to look really close at that picture. Can you see what's in those windpipes? First of all, how big is a bee? A little honeybee is about so big, right? So how big can the windpipes be in that tiny little bee? Second, look at the picture. What do you see in it? Do you see bugs? These are called tracheal mites. When we talked about arthropods, we talked specifically about arachnids. So the arachnids are ticks, spiders, scorpions, and mites. It's inappropriate to say that a mite is a microscopic tick, but that's close enough for your imagining to imagine that a mite is basically a microscopic tick. So how big are the trachea in a honeybee? And we're talking about, way thinner than the point on a needle. And we're saying, look here, there are parasites living in the windpipes of this poor honeybee. They're called tracheal mites. This is the way the setup works. This is how it's set up in an insect. Here we see a grasshopper. Very small little holes on the sides of the abdomen of the animal are referred to as spiracles. These spiracles are the openings to the trachea. And these trachea go throughout the entire animal's body. And if you notice, these are the cells that make up the body of the bug. And these tiny, 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 tiny little air chambers go out to each of these cells, each cell within the animal draws its oxygen directly from the air. That's how tracheal respiration works. And that's how bugs breathe. Another thing. When a bug hits your windshield, what color does it smear? Like a white or yellow goop? What do you imagine that goop is that spreads all over your windshield? Imagine if you hit, a bird. What spreads all over your windshield if you hit a bird? Cracks? Blood. So the stuff that squishes out of the bug on your windshield is its blood. What color isn't it? It's not red. And that is because bug blood, it's called hemolymph, just like it sounds. Hemolymph is bug blood, and it doesn't carry oxygen. Your blood is red because it carries oxygen. Their blood isn't because it doesn't. Kind of interesting little tidbit. Bug blood does not carry oxygen.